You read the Odyssey. You think this epic is a myth of the past. You are wrong. What it actually is the collective accumulation of all the things humans held in high regard. They respected these traits because the world was brutal. You learn about greatness from the Odyssey. You learn how to operate in a hostile system. You must look at the text as a manual for survival. The ancient world did not have safety nets. A mistake resulted in death. The writers of this epic recorded the exact mechanisms of success. Greatness is not a gift. Greatness is a mechanical process. You use this process to control your environment. You must look at one specific sequence. You must analyze the cave of the Cyclops. This sequence contains the complete blueprint for macro strategy. It contains the rules of structural leverage. You bring your men into a cave. You find food. You find shelter. You wait for the owner to return. The owner is Polyphemus. He is a giant. He enters the cave. He brings his sheep inside. He takes a massive rock. He places the rock over the entrance. The cave is now a closed system. You are trapped. The giant sees your men. He grabs two of them. He kills them. He eats them. The giant goes to sleep. You face an overwhelming force. You face a competitor with absolute physical superiority. The competitor controls the environment. The competitor controls the exit. You look at your resources. You have a sword. You have men. The enemy is asleep. You must ask a critical question here. Why does Odysseus not kill the giant immediately? He has the weapon. He has the opportunity. The giant is vulnerable. The answer is system dependency. You must analyze the structure of your problem. If you kill the giant dies. But the rock remains at the door. You do not have the physical strength to move the rock. If the giant dies, you die in the cave. You starve. This is the first rule of greatness. You must map the dependencies of your system. You do not react to the immediate threat. You control your micro-reactions to serve your macro strategy. A micro-reaction is anger. A micro-reaction is fear. You want to use the sword. You want to eliminate the immediate source of fear. You must separate your emotional data from your operational data. You must identify the primary constraint. The primary constraint is the rock. The only mechanism capable of moving the rock is the giant. Therefore, the giant is an essential component of your survival. You cannot destroy a component that you need. You must preserve the enemy until the enemy completes the required function. This requires extreme emotional control. You watch the giant eat your men. You hold your position. You do not attack. Greatness requires this level of calculation. You need a new strategy. You must change the state of the enemy. You cannot use brute force. You must use leverage. Leverage means you use a small input to create a large output. You look at the resources inside the closed system. You do not wish for outside help. You do not complain about your lack of tools. You examine the cave. You find an olive tree club. The giant uses it as a walking stick. You find fire. You use the tools of the enemy. You cut a section of the wood. You sharpen the wood. You put the wood in the fire. The fire hardens the wood. You have manufactured a weapon from the inventory of the enemy. This is macro strategy. You convert hostile resources into operational assets. You wait for the next day. The giant leaves. He moves the rock. He blocks the cave again. He returns at night. He eats two more men. You must execute the next phase of the system. You must alter the processing speed of the enemy. You have a small skin of highly concentrated wine. You offer the wine to the giant. The giant drinks. The giant likes the taste. The wine is a chemical tool. You introduce a new variable into the biological system of the enemy. The wine reduces the cognitive function of the giant. The wine induces a deep sleep. Before the giant sleeps, He asks your name. You must process this request. Why does the giant want your name? The giant operates in a network. The giant has neighbors. If you give your real name, you give accurate data to the enemy network. You must not do this. You tell the giant your name is nobody. Why do you use this specific word? You must understand information warfare. You do not refuse to answer. A refusal creates suspicion. You provide an answer, but you provide corrupted data. You insert a logic virus into the communication system of the enemy. You build a defense mechanism using only syntax. Nobody is a label that cancels itself. You will see the result of this macro strategy very soon. Greatness requires you to control the flow of information. The giant falls asleep. The giant is incapacitated by the wine variable. You execute the physical strike. You take the hardened stake. You heat it in the fire. You and your men drive the stake into the single eye of the giant. You destroy the optical sensor of the enemy. You do not kill the enemy. You blind the enemy. The enemy can still move the rock. The enemy can still provide the mechanical force you require. But the enemy can no longer target you accurately. You reduce the capability of the threat while you preserve the utility of the threat. This is a precise operation. The giant wakes up. The giant feels extreme pain. The giant screams. The scream is an alarm signal. The alarm signal travels across the island network. The neighboring giants hear the scream. They come to the outside of the cave. They ask a question through the rock. They ask, who hurts Polyphemus? The giant processes the question. The giant accesses the data. The giant yells, nobody is killing me. The network receives this data. The network processes the data. The network concludes that if nobody is hurting Polyphemus, the pain comes from a god. The pain is a natural disease. The network decides it cannot intervene. The neighboring giants leave. You must study this result. You defeated an entire army of giants. You did not use a sword. You did not use physical force. You used a single word. You manipulated the internal logic of the enemy system. You made the enemy transmit a signal that neutralized his own backup forces. This is extreme leverage. You changed the structure of the conflict. You isolated the target. You still have a problem. The giant is blind. The giant is isolated, but the giant is angry. The rock is still at the door. You must exit the closed system. The next morning, the sheep must go out to eat grass. The giant must move the rock. The giant rolls the rock away. But the giant sits at the entrance. He extends his hands. He feels the space. He waits for you and your men to walk through the door. If he feels a human, he will crush the human. You ask another question. How do you bypass a security scanner? The giant uses touch as his primary sensor. The giant expects to feel human skin or human clothes. The giant also expects his sheep to exit. The sheep are approved assets. The giant trusts the sheep. The system permits the sheep to pass. Through the door, you must attach yourself to the approved asset. You take the sheep, you tie 3 sheep together. You place 1 man under the middle sheep. You bind the man to the wall on the underside of the animal. You repeat this process for all your men. You take the largest ram for yourself. You hold on to the underside of the ram. The sheep walk toward the door. The giant touches the top of the sheep. The giant feels war. The giant processes the tactile data. The data matches the approved profile. The giant lets the sheep pass. The giant speaks to your ram. He asks why the ram is the last to leave. He suspects nothing about the underside. You ride the approved asset through the security checkpoint. You exit the cave. You release yourself from the sheep. You move your men to the ship. You escape. You must extract the core principles from this sequence. You must apply them to your operations. First, you must identify the structural constraint. In every situation, there is a rock blocking the door. You must find it. You must not waste energy on secondary problems. You focus all calculations on the primary constraint. Second, you must map the dependencies. Who controls the constraint? What forces act upon it? You must preserve the elements necessary to remove the constraint, even if those elements are hostile. You do not destroy a useful enemy. You manage the enemy. Third, you must control your emotions. Fear and anger make you act at the micro level. They make you strike with the sword. They cause you to fail. You must suppress these reactions. You must hold your position. You must let the system develop. You must wait for the optimal moment to apply leverage. Fourth, you must build tools from the environment. You will never have perfect resources. You will operate in closed systems. You must analyze the inventory of the system. You must take neutral objects and modify them. You take the wood, you take the fire. You create a weapon. You adapt. Fifth, you must alter the state of the competitor. You use variables to degrade their performance. You use the wine. You do not fight a competitor at maximum capacity. You introduce friction into their system. You slow their processing speed. You create a vulnerability. Sixth, you must execute information warfare. You control what the enemy knows. You control what the enemy communicates. You build a false identity. You give the enemy a virus disguised as data. You use the nobody protocol. You make the enemy network defeat itself. You use syntax to create physical isolation. Seventh, you strike with extreme precision. You target the senses of the enemy. You blind the opponent. You remove their ability to track your movements. You leave their mechanical strength intact, but you destroy their guidance system. Eighth, you employ parasitic attachment for extraction. You do not force your way through a barrier. You find the entity that the barrier allows to pass. You find the sheep. You attach your operation to the approved entity. You let the enemy system carry you to safety. You let the enemy do the work. This is the structure of greatness. It is a cold, rational framework. It does not require magic. It requires observation. It requires discipline. It requires an absolute commitment to leverage. You look at the world today. You see chaos. You see brutal competition. The rules have not changed. The environment is different, but the mechanics are identical. The market is the cyclops. The competitor is the giant. The barrier to entry is the rock. You must stop reacting to the world. You must start processing the world. You must read the data. You must design the system. You must apply the leverage. You enter the cave. You assess the threat. You find the constraint. You build the tool. You give the false data. You blind the sensor. You ride the asset out the door. You do this every time. You build greatness, action by action. You follow the manual. You use the system. You survive. You win.